CEO actually sent out a tweet saying that this happened and no, nothing has been breached, but they just found it out. So they wanted everyone to change their password, not just in Twitter site, but because many people use the same password in many different sites, right? So change those passwords because internally employees might have seen those passwords. So officially there was no breach because they will never disclose that there was a breach. Because remember that today economy depends on this information.
Out of curiosity, how many people have heard of the EU's general data protection stuff? Maybe seen it like on a website. The EU has much stricter regulations for how this thing is reported than the United States does.
So is that why, like, when you log into a website, it's like asking you to change or do you accept these policies now? Because they're operating.
I think with the more recent stuff, yeah, a lot of sites have had to change how they store data to adopt the EU's laws. I think for the normal like terms and conditions stuff, I don't know exactly how the regulations work. I'm not really the person asking on that.
What was it called that you discussed this month?
The EU's General Data Protection Law. Or I think it just might be General Data Protection.
Just search for EU privacy. It has been a very, you probably have been receiving a lot of emails from a lot of websites recently that they are updating their privacy policies and those things. So it is picked by EU.
I don't know if any of you have seen the little thing that asks you to allow cookies on a website. That's also because of these EU laws.
Oh, no, I just wanted to make a comment. I was hearing people talk about recently that the EU kind of laughs at America because we're all about protecting our privacy against governments, but we don't consider about protecting ourselves against organizations, and whereas the EU is doing both. So.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff from the EU is kind of rolled over because a lot of these companies do business in both the United States and the EU.
Standard practice.
And they don't want to have all these different policies for dealing with data in multiple countries. So the EU has kind of helped us in that sense. Okay. So the last two things we have are what kind of technologies might be stolen. And this is something that when you're talking about physical security, it's easy. I can walk over and take this mouse and leave with it, and I stole the mouse. But if we're talking about cybersecurity, it's a little more complicated. So like one example is when we're talking about passwords, maybe I breached the company's servers and stole the password hashes. So those are the sort of things we might talk about. And to ask questions again. So any thoughts on?
Well, like it would be easier to like really reach or take information from healthcare companies.
Healthcare records, yeah. And actually healthcare records are, if you're an attacker, one of those valuable things you can get. I don't remember the numbers, but I remember reading that that's one of the highest priced personal records. So attackers are very, very interested in getting health records.
What about like coding for apps? Like my son was in a class in high school and somebody had stolen the coding that he'd come up with and then they got the credit for the little, it's like a chess app or something.
Like intellectual property.
Yeah, intellectual property and source code. That's another, especially in industrial espionage. A lot of companies take great precautions to make sure their source code isn't stolen. And especially with source code, it can be very difficult to find plagiarism in code. Because a lot of times you have code that does something. And I mean, when you're copying, say, copying one variable to another, there are only so many ways you can go about doing that. And it's easy for someone to move things around, change variables, and disguise the fact that they've stolen source code. So a lot of companies are very careful to make sure that their source code isn't available. Anything else?
Transferring money from bank accounts to other bank accounts.
Yeah.
Not just getting into a wire fraud.
Yeah, and I would at least like to think that banks are very good about preventing that from happening, but that's absolutely something. If you breach a bank application, that would be very bad. And there are cases of that
Copyrights and
happening.
trademarks.
I think
So,
there was one very big bank heist. I think it was, I don't remember where it was off the top of my head. I might be able to look it up in a bit. But there are instances of that.
So again, checking an update.
No, go ahead.
I'll ask a question, you first go ahead.
What's the intellectual property for source code? Would it be more like a copyright?
I actually don't know. I think it's similar to written word in how it's protected, but I actually don't know. So I should look that one up.
So I have a question on the financial side. So let's say you are a financial sector, like let's say Bank of America or Wells Fargo here. So out of the three properties of CIA, confidentiality, integrity and availability, which property as bank will you mostly put weight on? What is the highest priority that you will give to your transactions? Confidentiality, integrity or availability? Availability? What else? Integrity?
All three.
All three of them? Integrity. Okay? Because banks do not care if how much money you are getting if it is seen. They do not care about that, right? Because they know the value might be easily known to anyone. So they do not care really about your privacy. They do not really care about the channel they care about their availability, but not that much whether the channel right now is available or not. But absolutely they care about that no money should be manipulated. Right? No amount, no information should ever be able to manipulate. Okay? So integrity is most important for them.
Anything else before we switch to the last slide? So the last slide is sort of similar to this one, but instead of talking about things that are stolen, things that are compromised. So let's see.
Like web services or?
Yeah, absolutely. So if your system goes down, that might be availability. And we sort of talked about this 2 slides previously when we were talking about CIA. So for example, a web service might be compromised. And one thing that might also happen, you might, if you can get into the server that's hosting that website, because the website itself is a series of pages that are stored somewhere. And when someone goes to that website, those pages are sent to them. So if an attacker can get access to those pages and modify them, then they can change what the website is sending people who are visiting. That's a pretty big compromise.
That includes databases or web servers, it includes or?
So I want to talk about the database it's also stored on a server. Sometimes it's stored on the same server, sometimes it's not. But yeah, if you can change what the database has on it, then that's also a pretty big compromise. So,
Privacy.
absolutely. Service for that. Like if you have, no, for privacy. Like for example, if you have a website that's storing private customer data like credit cards, and that's compromised, then you're sort of overlapping with stolen at that point. But yeah, you absolutely. Anything else? It's been about an hour, so probably go ahead and take a break.